Hey, this is Andy from Business Without Bullshit, and we're here with Nick Matthews, who's in charge of Europe and other places beside of CultureAmp. What the hell is CultureAmp, Nick?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so CultureAmp, we're the employee experience platform. We're an Australian tech company founded in Melbourne, Australia. We help about 7,500 organizations around the world, really focus on helping sort of their HR leaders, their executives, their sort of leaders of scale, really with their employee engagement, performance management, and helping to really take action on all things people.
Lots of people say they do that though, but you kind of focus on this sort of concept of that you've got to set some values.
Yeah, the idea really is that values are at the heart of how you produce your kind of culture. We talk about it that sort of brand is a sort of promise to your customers, and it's actually culture is how you deliver it.
Culture seems to be like the foundation of business, but you've got to, don't think, oh, what values, nonsense, American rubbish, don't know what that's about. Like, actually, it's a fascinating conversation to understand, like, the simple way that you structure a few things to enable you to build scale your business. And without it, you're buggered. So check it out. Today, we are joined by Nick Matthews, CultureAmp's Vice President and General Manager for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I mean, chuck them all in, why not? CultureAmp is the world's leading employee experience platform, revolutionizing how 25 million employees and over 6,500 companies create a better world of work. They empower companies to transform employee engagement, drive performance management, and develop high-performing teams. Clients include Cava, On, Asana, Dolby, McDonald's, NASDAQ. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, very good to be here.
Fantastic. So we're going to keep this punchy, Nick. So let's get down to it. What's keeping Nick up at night?
So a couple of things. I think, the world's pretty hard right now. And I think what we're seeing is that the world is hard externally, and that is filtering into organizations. So, I mean, pretty much since 2016, it's all been sort of downhill in terms of whether it's Brexit in the UK or just general sort of macroeconomic challenge. And I think we've seen increased polarization. We've seen all of the challenges around, as you say, interest rates, inflation, COVID. Like, you think about what's happened since 2016, and effectively it's just made the world a lot more unpredictable, a lot harder. And I think, as you say, much more extreme. So everyone seems to be on sort of one end of an extreme. And cost of living crisis, politics, you name it, it's hard. And so what we've seen, and what keeps me up at night, is that we've seen that filter through into organizations. So if you're a business leader or an employee, so much has changed in that kind of period. And if you're a manager now, you're no longer just trying to run a business or run a team. You're often trying to kind of coach or manage employees through all of this difficulty. And so the role of HR and the role of managers has become increasingly much, much harder through the sort of the context. And this is what kind of keeps me up at night. It's what keeps a lot of our chief people officers, heads of business, HR directors. They're really focused on it because it's a hard place to be in business at the moment.
And do you mean that things are polarized? So people, I mean, I notice that everyone's angry, but that just means that it's hard to look after people because everyone's coming at the problem from one end of it. We're less in the middle. Is that what you're sort of saying?
Yeah, I think everything has gone to extreme. So, if people were sort of wealthy, they've become more wealthy. If people feel like they're, great example, we're here in London. If you go back 10 years ago, what it was like to kind of work in London, what you could expect to rent, buy a property, all those things have completely changed. So if you're, and wages have risen, et cetera, but that creates a huge pressure, cost of living, where people are now sort of in their sort of, early 30s, and they can no longer, the aspirations or what they saw in previous generations are unable to do. That all comes together inside the workforce. And so if you're someone running a business of 50 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, that is the context that everyone's operating within. And if you're in HR, you're front and center. They're just about recovered from COVID, where suddenly it was, right, everyone's in offices and you have to now make everyone work from home and be hybrid and keep them safe and all of that. So all of that has happened in the last 8 years. And so what keeps me up at night is that has not got easier. And in fact, things are kind of compounding. And it makes, great HR leaders very much in demand, because if you can navigate your way through that, your people are your greatest advantage in business. But if you see so many people finding it, whether it's we have lots of surveys of HR people, sort of HR for HR, and they consistently say how sort of tired, burnt out, sort of challenged they are in this kind of space. So to answer your question of what keeps me up at night is like, that's the context, the impact on HR, and then the challenge of either being a manager or leader or HR navigating through all of this inside the workforce, where work is no longer just work. Because we're hybrid, or you're fully remote, or you're in office, like all of this stuff comes crashing together. And if you're a leader, your people now look to you to have the answers for everything, when that potentially wasn't the case many, many years ago. And so it's a really dynamic, interesting kind of place to be right now in business, especially in the HR world.
But you're dealing with this on two levels. On one level, you're dealing with it as a boss. So you're sort of talking almost from personal experience. But on the other level, this is what your business does, isn't it? Tries to glue culture together.
I mean, what you got there was my personal opinion, because I'm a history and politics graduate who, runs a large part of a tech company. And so my brain loves the sort of the why stuff happening, what's happening in society and how that impacts business. But yeah, our company is there to support people leaders, executives, managers, through this sort of journey by effectively giving them better data to allow them to make better decisions, on all things. And so that's kind of where we sort of play, which is broadly under the bucket of what we call employee experience.
It's sort of counter to the general position, which we're told is diversity is good. Be as diverse as you can in terms of if people are all coming from completely different worlds and experiences, there's a tension there of trying to sort of hold them all together. But there's a second point, which is that you should get better outcomes. I mean, if you sort of like, let's try and take the wealth disparity out of it, because that's a real sort of flamed. But if we just say, look, the baby boomers are having a very different experience to the young people. I do struggle when people say, well, it was all right for them and it's not all right for them. It's like, well, on what metric? I mean, there's a million things that go on there. Like, they didn't have Netflix. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have smartphones. As far as I understand it, there are really no metrics to say that things are getting worse. Things have been getting, my dad talks about how cold it was and you had to get up in the morning to get the fire going and whatever.
Social media. So I think that to go back to you on that, I would say that people's perception is that things are worse because social media amplifies negativity, sort of rage, kind of, things that sort of get you sort of attention. And so irrespective of whether it is better or worse, the perception amongst employees is that it has got worse. And you're seeing this play out in the US at the moment, where you've got, Joe Biden sort of saying, look what I've done for the economy. And yet everyone is sort of saying, I feel worse off in my pocket. Which argument's going to win? How people feel. Doesn't matter what place. So I think that's what's going on. And it's just, I always talk about this because I think the context is always important. And then you have to say, okay, great. So what are we actually going to do about it? So the best way that someone describes, well, actually our CEO said this, is that sort of culture is like a sort of block of marble, and you sort of, it's already there. It kind of exists. And so how does a block of marble go to a statue? Is it you sort of carve away at it and then suddenly, boom, it's there. So it's not something that you cook up. It already exists within an organization. And the trick is to kind of almost expose it and turn it into something that is really sort of beautiful and valuable. And so culture is this sort of slightly ethereal thing that people sort of talk about. But I think to make it truly simple, the best way that we talk about culture is actually it comes down to values. So your values are actually how you
as a business.
Your values are how you effectively live your culture.
Don't you always end up with the same annoying words?
Oh, you can do.
Caring, we're innovative.
Yeah, and they get thrown on. They get
put on the wall.
Thrown on the wall. And so, but I think doing values right and having values at the heart of everything you do as an organization is actually true.
When you say the word value, what I'm curious about, does it boil down to a word, or is a value more like a sentence? Or?
It's a sentence that you can apply, you can do something with, but it also should have a shadow side so that when you're not doing that you're very clear in what that is. And so it's good to kind of call out how you would do that so that people are aware that there's good and bad ways to use those values. And it's all of that together that gives you sort of a map of how to sort of to operate. And so, at CultureAmp, we've got 4 values. And our values, so have the courage to be vulnerable.
Courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah, have the courage to be vulnerable. Trust people to own decisions.
Trust people to own decisions, yeah.
Learn faster through feedback. And amplify others.
All businesses could benefit from those, couldn't they?
And actually, so the founding story of CultureAmp is fascinating. So we actually, when the founders came together in Australia, in sort of Melbourne, Australia, they actually kind of co-created the values first before we had a product.
Okay.
And so the first kind of intranet page for CultureAmp was a list of those values. And they're still there 14 years later. Now, the strategy's changed, the company's changed, our branding's changed. Like some of the founders are still there, some of them aren't, now nearly 1,000 people. But those values are still there. So how do you create culture? It starts with that, because in the creation of those values, you start to decide what it is that your kind of company represents and what you're trying to do. And so that is why there are so many words often on walls. I think there's good intention behind it. I think people are trying to sort of to do that, but it takes a full-throated effort to do it, and also for people to truly understand how to use them. Otherwise, they do just become things that sort of you think, oh, they're over there on the wall, I'm not going to use them.
Are values things you're working towards rather than things you do already? You're saying it's cast in marble, so it's already there, but learning faster through feedback, I mean, that
means that you don't know it all.
Very linked to courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and the courage to be vulnerable is sort of saying, as a leader, especially in today's world, the pace of change, technology evolution. I mean, AI is a really good example. That's come out of nowhere in the last, and if someone was to ask you as a leader, okay, your strong views on AI, please. There's a real risk that actually you might be wafer thin in terms of truly understanding about it. But the urge as a leader is to kind of speak confidently as if you do know. That actually doesn't help. That's the sort of Titanic going towards the iceberg and sort of saying, yep, full steam ahead, I know what I'm doing.
Yours are all learn faster through feedback, you don't know it all. Courage to be vulnerable, you don't know it all. Trust people to own their decisions.
This is my favorite. This is one. So values, I think, to answer how do you apply them, is that I often say values are there for when you get stuck, when you have the tough moments. So often, and trust people to own decisions is a great one. You'll be in a meeting, and it could be junior folks, it could be the leadership meeting. And you'll be on a topic and everyone's sort of got a very strong view about what you should be doing. And you kind of get to a bit of an impasse. And that's often the moment where you kind of go, right, let's go to the values. And as a good example with that one, the answer to that is, well, whose decision is it? Because to be able to trust someone to own a decision, there has to be one person that has that decision. So often we get stuck. And often I come into a meeting and people look to me and kind of say, Nick, you need to make the decision. And I often kind of go, it's actually not my decision. Let's talk about whose it is. And weirdly, you often get to a point where you can agree on whose decision it actually is.
But that's a great question.
So the hard thing with that then, and this is why values are so good, is you may disagree with the decision that, let's just say it's your decision that you've made, but because of the value, we actually have to trust you to own that now.
It's like, okay, it's your decision. Does that not make me out for the firing line in bigger companies? It's like, yeah, it was your fault, exactly.
Well, there are moments of that. And so all of this is around trying to move fast in an unpredictable world where, as you say, kind of 12 months later, the world could be completely different. And if you're all looking in the organization to one person, the chances are that unless that person is truly exceptional, they're not going to have the answers to everything. And probably the answer exists somewhere within your organization. And so you have to have a mechanism to be able to unlock that. And for us, we believe that's kind of values.
It's also the sort of who gives a shitometer, isn't it? There's lots of decisions that it's like, okay, well, who actually gives a shit? Oh, I really care about this.
Yeah,
all right.
I'm going to own this.
You own it then. Because it doesn't really, it matters, but it's, whether we have blue or red curtains or whatever, I mean, tell me a little bit about the program or the platform. So, okay, it's there to help big companies or decent sized companies deal with culture. You put your values in, then what happens?
Well, actually, don't put the values in.
They don't go in?
No. So this is the whole. So we have a kind of philosophical approach to the whole piece, which is what we call culture first. And you'll see all of our branding, and we have a podcast called Culture First. And And that's our philosophy underpinning, that if you put people and culture first, you will have better business outcomes. Values are a key cornerstone of that, but actually the work to do values is not a tech thing. That's having the right people and in the room, going through a process where you then agree and kind of lock in. What we do is we're saying, okay, if that is the case, what is the best way to actually at scale facilitate helping HR and people leaders or executives to make better decisions around their people? And the answer to that is through data. So if you think about it, HR is probably the last function in a business to truly have great data. So think about all the systems that exist for finance, right? You kind of think all the systems have been around for that for like decades. And the reality is that,
what's the data of HR when I'm on holiday?
So you have your sort of traditional, what we would call kind of your HRIS data, your information. So system of record would be holiday, pay, leave allowance, kind of what's your grade, who do you report to? So that's like,
whether you're a wanker.
But it's not, I'm not sure there's a demographic for that. It's probably some organizations that do.
It has a part to play.
So this is the bit. So where we then sit is we say, okay, so we help in three ways. So one is through employee engagement. So how are your people feeling? And that can also include at a point in time, but also through the life cycle of their journey. So how are they going through the interview process? How was their first 90 days joining an organization? How are they feeling leaving? If they're regrettable or non-regrettable. That data is so valuable. So how do you package that up and give that to a manager, a leader, an executive? Second thing is performance. So the other biggest lever is like, how do you actually run a fair and unbiased and effective performance management process? So we provide a platform to that helps reduce the bias through a whole range of different things, but often actually about making it really easy to kind of collect, sort of understand, and then actually act on that feedback over the course of the year. So when it comes to your performance review, and you've got 8 to do as a leader, you don't sit down and think and go, okay, when's the last time I worked with Andy? Last week, was it good? Was it bad? Well, it was all right. And then that's the basis of your review, when actually you've been working for 6 months and doing a whole range of things.
Yeah, that bias that we only remember the recent.
Yeah, so there's a whole other set of, we have people scientists at CultureAmp, and they would be here saying that there's 12 different types of biases and going through them all. But ultimately, there's a lot of bias that goes in. So we provide a platform to reduce that so that your employees go, okay, I might not necessarily agree with the outcome, because agreeing with a performance review, it's a very personal thing. And most people say, I could have done better. But what's crucial is that they believe that the process was fair. That's the thing, because then actually people say, oh, okay, and then they move on. So we do that. And then the third is, more recently, we just acquired an amazing organization in Serbia called Agnostic, and we're actually going to kind of bolt in what they do, which is people analytics. So really being able to ingest loads of your underlying system of record data, your HRS data, all the other kind of systems into one place to then see those insights, such as, hey, actually, where are we on gender pay gap in real time? Where are we going to, if we carry on in the way we're going, are there demographics of people, say, I don't know, high-performing women in engineering? Are they at more risk of leaving based on what they're telling us in their engagement survey or other kind of data? So, and that's almost like the real-time sort of forward-looking insights that allow you to kind of fly the plane as you're going along. And so we provide all those kind of sort of three sort of big buckets of capability. And you'll find that most organizations are doing all of those things in some form. And then we provide that in a technology platform that we think is great to use. So the thing about a sort of business software is it's typically been horrible to use. And so we've really got two main focuses. One is make it really actually easy to enjoyable, almost like consumer-like, as if you were sort of on a social media platform where it's just, yeah, that's good. I'm on the bus and I'm doing my engagement survey, and it's, what, this is actually pretty nice. Like, I'm actually thinking about what I'm doing versus going, oh, I can't log in. It doesn't work on my phone. I've got to fire up my laptop and the VPN. Like, instantly barrier to doing it. So providing that user experience. And then secondly, is making sure there is that rigorous kind of people science, i.e., does it stand up in court if you share that with your executive team? Because there's always super smart people that are very good at math, statistics, whatever it is, that kind of say how, exactly, that go, is this data valid? And so those are the two key things that we do. And
so in a bigger company, is the data valid from the perspective of them being, someone's disgruntled saying that I wasn't treated fairly or something, that level you're meaning? that you can sort of retrace your steps and why decisions were made, or
Totally. And that people feel comfortable that it is fair. It hasn't been, if it was run internally, there's always a slight risk that people think, have the managers been in there? Can they see everything? Can they see all my responses? Can they see my comments? So using a third party platform, it was almost kind of like having an audited set of things where you say, this is external and this is us. And so this has been going on even before technology.
You kind of present yourself as that. It's not, the internal system for
it's
HR.
branded as, it has a logo.
It's CultureAmp's external, and it will say everything's super confidential. Or
and it will, and say you'd have an Uri Clark logo on there, but it would be the platform would be purple, which is what CultureAmp is. So people know very visually, like I'm not on my, this is not my answers are not going to Andrew's inbox directly. So that you can then sort of take umbrage with those.
Do you find firms want that information and find
100%?
Yeah,
100%. Because once you get past a certain size, I mean, how big is Uri Clark now?
158.
So I bet you there was a point where you probably would have thought, I kind of know what's going on.
Yeah. It's exactly now we're all like, shit, this is.
So to answer your earlier question, like most people start using us around about 100 employees. But you think about what happens.
I was going to ask that. So we're actually a good demographic for you now.
100%.
Okay, I always think more like 500, 1,000 or...
No. And so, because you don't know. I mean, I have 110 people in EMEA that kind of work in the region. And I'm way past the point of being able to truly understand what's going on by just talking to people or saying, like, I really look at this data. So, and then you got to like 50,000 employees. I mean, it's a different scale then in terms of people knowing what to do. So that's what we do, it's been. I mean, I've been there 8 years now, and it's something that is increasingly starting to snowball.
You use it within your own company.
We call it customer zero. So we sort of dog food it all on ourselves, because if it, we are, and there's this weird thing where we're trying to build CultureAmp to be the type of customer that we serve. So a lot of what we do is to try and build our own organization to be culture first. So almost get to the end of the journey, get to a point in time where you look back and say, because we built it with a people and culture focus, the fact that we're a successful organization validates our whole thesis that's the right thing to do. So we're sort of doing this dual track where I almost have two jobs. One is to try and make sure that we're doing that internally in this region, and then be a kind of, customer service focused, client focused organization. And so I sort of wear two hats, like one's internal very much, and then the other one is...
Oh my God, he's changed hats. He's changed hats.
And I'm not quite sure what hats I'm wearing here, actually. I'm just here.
Yeah.
I care about both in the sense that I've always been kind of customer focused in my career. So that's just a natural part of I just love going to meet organizations. I'm sure you do. It's just, I just find it fascinating. I really care about the internal piece. I think because throughout my career, I've worked in different organizations and I've had experiences, some good, some bad. And I was sort of looking for an opportunity to sort of almost test some of those ideas out or do things a certain way that I think are the right way, and just being generally people-centric. So I kind of found the match here in CultureAmp, which is why I'm still here.
When you come up with values, are you supposed to add to them? Like you're supposed to add a value now and then, or you've just got 4 forever? Is that not normal? Can you have too many values?
It's a great question, because we actually started off with 3. So we had 3, and we had actually in the order that I kind of wrote them down. And actually what happened was Amplify Others was something that we named, and I say this, we named it about, it was probably like 2018. And actually it was someone internally that named it. It was Caitlin.
Named it mean coined it.
So sort of managed to put a sort of find the right words to encapsulate what the feeling that's happening. And it was around amplifying others. And so I think, first of all, there was a recognition that actually we were missing one. And then secondly, it was saying, well, what do we think it is? And we had a whole sort of session on that. And then we came out with Amplify Others. And so that's, so you can have more. I think any more than 4, it would start people, the rule of 3 is there for a reason, right? People remember stuff when you have 3. So 4, it's great. I mean, even when I read them out, my brain goes, I know 3, and I keep thinking, what's the 4th one? And that's just a sort of psychology thing. So I think 4 is good, because the main point is it doesn't really matter what your values are per se. It's that actually people know that they're there and understand them, because they could evolve, they could change, but actually having that and then not just being on the wall, I think is the key thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions, but I'm just let me just think I've got it clear in my head. Okay, I understand what CultureAmp does, and you're just coming to it from the perspective. There's lots of these HR systems out there. I mean, there's millions of them, and most of them are trying to do everything. You're just very focused on saying, okay, we think we've got a scientific way to get you some data, which I assume you're mostly collecting directly from the employees.
100%.
Okay. You raise it. Does it run itself? It raises questionnaires and say, oh, we better ask them some more questions, and something pops up on my phone.
Some of it's automatic. So you can set up all the sort of the onboarding surveys that trigger after, someone's been here for 90 days, send them a survey to sort of see how they're getting on. Some of the bigger sort of broader, maybe 60 question surveys, we find that the teams actually like to be a bit more sort of precise around when they're going out. Questions tend to get signed off by exec teams. There actually is a lot of rigor that goes around it. So there's a mixture of stuff that's automated and then stuff that is deliberate. But yeah, we still do a lot of surveys. I always say this, that until we're in the matrix where you literally plug someone into the back of the head and download stuff, they are the best way of actually understanding what your
people don't mind it as long as they know the answer. I find sort of filling in forms is good.
Well, or that actually something happens off the back of it. So that's the biggest challenge we find, is that people do the survey and then it either goes into a black hole and they never hear anything about it, or that what comes out doesn't necessarily match what was in the survey. So you have to really take people on a journey saying, you said this, these are the things that we think are the most statistically relevant. We're going to look into that. We're going to take action on these 3 things over this time frame, hold us to that. And then in 3 or 6 months or a year's time, we'll ask you again, do you think we moved on that?
And what's the 4th value?
Yeah, I'm already sweating.
Do you surround it with HR? I mean, I've been involved in these things because sometimes if you want to give good feedback, because feedback's separate to you, this is not where people are getting appraisal feedback.
No, they are.
Because that I find that if to give stuff that's more complex as feedback, it then needs a lot of, to be honest, sort of psychological support. It needs a lot of, that person might need a lot of love, Yeah. So then it's like, well, maybe you've got like ADHD or something. That's a psychological, you need to go and maybe chat to someone. Oh yeah, you do. And then that's a little bit of a psychological hit, because then you're like, oh, these things that I thought were made me quirky and funny are actually really annoying for other people, and they find them really difficult to deal with. And I'm stressing people out and these certain issues, So how deep do you go into that space? Do you know what I mean? How much can you...
Well, as I was saying, there's a great chance for you there to sort of learn faster through feedback and have the courage to be vulnerable.
But how do you... Because it can be quite dangerous, can't it? Because it could be quite destabilizing,
this is sort of always super important for, when we do our own internal performance management or providing feedback, we actually have, before you give the feedback, we have a little box that says, here is the link to how to give feedback, the best practice. Please tick to confirm that you've actually read this before you go in. This is just a little aid memoir to do it, because you say it is really powerful. People really can ruminate and take it very
especially
kind of...
in writing. Verbally is almost better because you don't quite remember it. Writing, people might reread a sentence again and again.
Yeah, so, and I think good culture... I think culture is it's a bit of a nebulous term, and it causes people to have this kind of clarifying question around what is it. I think what the goal you're aiming for is kind of psychological safety, which is, do people feel comfortable sharing a kind of contrary opinion? And that could be either in a team setting or in kind of thing. And so a lot of companies we work with are actually, the sort of nirvana for them is trying to create a culture of psychological safety, because
I might fill in something, sorry to interrupt, I might fill in something and it pings up then on my phone and says, you've had feedback from John. He says that your work was lazy.
A good example of it is we would have kind of prompts, and the prompts will be, the prompts would say a whole range of kind of skills or competencies for the feedback. So not just like an empty box saying, go to town. Like there is that. But it would say let's just say being a host of a podcast. Right, that would be one of the kind of the cards, okay? And it would have two sort of boxes there, and one would say kind of getting there, and the other would say like rocking it. And you get to choose on all those skill cards.
Oh, but you only give them like 2 options often.
2 options, which is getting there, i.e. getting there suggests that there is kind of room for improvement. And this is all about creating a culture of psychological safety. And then you get to the end, and then there's a kind of free text box where you could sort of...
And AI, no doubt, could start rewriting this, because you could write it, and no doubt you could develop your AI to say, I wouldn't put it like that, John. They'll burst into tears. You know, because that getting the other thing from feedback is who gives it. So some people always give nice feedback, some people give nasty feedback.
I think AI is going to impact HR in a number of ways. And I think that if you go back to the original challenge, like HR are very, 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 very busy.
Yes. Dealing with the fact that someone can't be there at 3:35 and they've now got the kid. The details are just endless, you know.
Well, there's also a lot of human stuff that goes on.
That's what I mean. The kids can't come home, and did you know? And I'm sorry, and I'm upset, and my sister died, and
it's hiring, it's performance management, it's people leaving the business for good reasons or bad reasons. There's employee relations issues. There's just opening a new office in another country that requires different benefits. Like it's actually quite a sort of a broad range, and so anything that can help those teams be more efficient, they're grabbing at. So we have a feature where if you're an organization of say like 10,000 employees, then you can imagine that there's 60 questions in an engagement survey. And people on average, you know, they tend to leave a good couple of comments on each of the kind of the questions. So if you think about the number of comments that get generated on a big survey like that, in the old days, so the 8 years ago, when I first started, I went around to kind of organizations and you meet the HR team and say, right, we've just closed our survey. And we've got, 26 sheets worth of comments. And what they would do, they would literally say, okay, here you go. Here's your 8. Here's a highlighter. Off you go. Go and look through and sort of say, you know, what's positive, what's negative, call out anything that's interesting, all that kind of stuff. So you'd have like 4 people go and do that for 3 days. Yeah. Now, AI, you can say, summarize those for me. Give me 5 examples that correspond, like 5 actual examples that support that narrative. Give me the sentiment analysis, all those kind of stuff, like instantly.
Wow.
So that is why HR are kind of pulling on AI. I think the flip side, though, is to the point that you raise, which is we want AI to be supportive and make people more effective. We don't necessarily want them kind of writing someone's performance review per se, because there all kinds of questions around hallucinations, bias, all those kind of things. So when we speak to HR, the big focus, and we're partnering with Google on this, and the reason we're partnering with Google is because actually they have the most, I think, the biggest focus on making sure that it's done the right way. Because people, you know, there's a very sort of, if people are kind of eased into it and they have full trust that actually when they're writing something and it's being kind of prompted or supported, you know, that's so crucial that it's right. And so because of the risk is otherwise that people do just chuck stuff in, they get stuff out, they slap it in a performance review, and, you know, that can literally make or break someone's, you know, promotion, compensation, all that kind of stuff. So there are some things like that where on some it makes absolute sense. And we're trying to work through all those kind of use cases where people will say, yeah, that really is adding me loads of value. Equally, I think where it will end up actually is if you're, I don't know, I have 8 direct reports. When I'm coming to write their performance review every 6 months, having something that would say, okay, I've actually summarized all of the feedback that they've had over the last 6 months. And I've put it into kind of buckets for you. I've kind of highlighted some key things, here's some data, et cetera. Having that there that I can then say, right, I'm going to write my own report of that, but I've got the kind of the notes. Yeah. I can do that in, you know, extreme focus can get that done in sort of 20 minutes.
Well, you're giving better feedback because you're better prepared.
So I think that's where it's going to be. It's more going to be everyone assistant. I don't think people, if I said to an HR, yeah, we've got this magical tool and it allows you to write everyone's performance reviews like instantly.
I was thinking you feed it, but it could adjust your language a bit, couldn't it?
And I think that might be part of it.
I think that would be sense to say, why don't we phrase
it
like
Grammarly,
this?
right? And
rather than they have to even watch the video. It
100%.
just says, I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And you say, no, I really am trying to say he's a dickwad.
Thing that really winds me up at the moment is if I go onto LinkedIn, there is a huge binary argument around remote work versus in office.
Oh, yeah.
It drives me bananas. And the reason it drives me bananas is because, I know maybe it's because I'm a Libra and a historian and everything's grey rather than sort of black and white, is that the reality is that there is such a nuanced answer to this based on your company, your role, where you are in your career, your personality, there's so much that goes into it. However, you know, there's not a day that goes by that I look onto LinkedIn and someone shows a picture of a crowded tube station saying, how could they force us back to the office, or look at all these people going into banks and they all look so miserable going in 5 days a week. And then you have the one that really gets me is people sort of sat on a beach with a laptop and a kind of a cool drink saying, this could be you. You could be working fully remote. And if your company's not allowing this, they are bad.
Yeah.
And then my favorite thing.
And how much work do you get done on the beach?
Well, my issue is not my issue is not about that. Like I am fully supportive of, we work hybrid. Like I've got kids and dog, and being flexible and having the ability. And we have a sort of we've got a hybrid policy at CultureAmp, which actually isn't a policy necessarily per se. But what annoys me is you often click on sort of the profiles of people that have those pictures, and you realise that they're selling software or solutions that support remote work.
Yeah.
It's entirely biased, but again, go back to that polarizing nature. It's become a binary thing. Remote work good, in-office work bad. And that drives me. I
agree with you that it's great. It's not, and neither's bad. They're both good, or they're both bad. Whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a twat, right? I'm a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Yeah, me too, roughly.
So, but that really works for me.
It works for me too. It gives me Monday to prep and actually do some work. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, out and about.
Yeah. That works for me.
Friday to get drunk.
Yeah. Well, everyone's different. And look, there are people that have in personal situations, and some of our best people work fully remote. My issue is not with that. My issue is the binary nature of the debate and argument. That it's like I go on every day and I look for something.
This is true in everything, everywhere, and it's driving anger, and it's being, as you say, driven by different forces wishing to push different agendas, and it's clickbait, I think, as well. I think a lot of it, we even got some advice about how you're supposed to write podcast things. And it's you're not supposed to say what it is. You're supposed to say, you'll never guess what he sticks up his ass next, or whatever, that you're like, what? Nick thinks that AI is going to give feedback, or does he, or whatever, it's and so that is the sort of, polarizing again. It's journalism. It's this sort of, it's like we only engage. It's like we finally know the truth because it's all about engagement. And the truth is we like looking at tits and we like outrageous argument. What was your first job?
Swimming teacher and lifeguard.
Oh yeah, for Liam Neeson.
Well, actually, that was the pinnacle. It started off in northwest London in South Oxy, which is a wonderful part of the world. I went working in a council swimming pool, and that was very different.
They're the worst English swimming pools. What is it about them? You just feel like there's just
asbestos.
Is it?
Yeah, just a lot of asbestos.
There's a plaster somewhere near you at all points. Yeah. Favorite subject at school?
Economics.
Ooh, I didn't.
My favorite, my economics teacher was great because he often would say to us, every week we had to read the business section of the Sunday Times.
Oh, great
and
choice.
Then come in and talk about it on a Monday. We did that, and it was actually brilliant. I think it was actually a really lazy thing for him to do, because he could just sort of, he'd be reading it on a Sunday and then he'd say, what do you think? But it was awesome at getting it out of the textbooks into real life.
It's actually really good advice. People should go and read the newspaper. We can't get the young here necessarily. I mean, we don't try very hard to encourage them, but you reach a point later in your life when you're suddenly I need to read the fucking newspapers,
I'm that guy though that I read the FT.
I read the FT.
And I get it delivered at home, which all sounds very bougie, but only because when I get on the tube, I really just don't want to be on my phone. But the thing about FT, it's actually it's the most unbiased.
Yeah, I agree. Without favour, without fear. Without fear, without favour.
It has, we work in all industries, all segments, and so often there'll be customer news in there that's really useful. I quite enjoy it, but again, also it allows me to focus and not get sucked down the sort of the Twitter rabbit hole.
The rabbit hole, yeah. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Marine biologist. I wanted to be Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws.
That's my favourite film. Jaws. Is that like one of your favourite films?
Yeah.
Me too. What's your go-to karaoke song?
So I was thinking 20 years ago, it would have been something from Linkin Park. Now, actually, I had a very good rendition of this as a collective, which was Freedom by George Michael. At a karaoke bar in Melbourne, Australia last year. That was
Freedom.
Pretty special. Good harmonising.
Have you ever been fired?
I've been made redundant.
That'll do.
That was quite a humbling experience. The old 15-minute meeting in the diary at last minute notice.
And then where was that from?
From Microsoft.
Wow.
So I was in charge of a team, so I had that wonderful thing where I went first, and then I had to sit through everyone else's because then I was then in charge. So
It's the tissue box on the table that might be the
I
giveaway.
kind of knew there was a challenge when I walked into the room in London and someone from the West Coast of the US was sitting in the room unexpectedly. I was like, well, this isn't good.
I think we should add a question, which is tell us something crazy that you've done.
Oh, I would say crazy. One of my favourite stories is I did a lot of work in the Middle East years ago, and I actually ended up in a meeting with it was a huge client of Microsoft, which was the Bin Laden construction firm, which is the biggest construction firm in the world, and the CIO of the Bin Laden construction firm is a Bin Laden, and he was
the Bin Laden?
Yeah, and he was.
You met Bin Laden,
and it was his brother. It was one of those.
Right.
It was one of those meetings that wasn't planned,
Okay.
and so it just kind of happened off the back of a. It was more.
Do you know where your brother is?
The Microsoft team were saying, we've got to go to this meeting. We came to the meeting, sat in, and then he suddenly sat there thinking, how am I going to explain this one? So what was interesting though was that he said, he was a huge client of Microsoft, and we sort of said, we should get you over to the executive briefing center in Seattle, and it's going to be excellent. He said, well, number one, he said, we've got a bit of a PR problem, which I greatly appreciated. And he said, to be clear, I get into the US, I'm just not sure I would get out. And it's one of those things where you just can't believe that you come out and you sort of ring home and say, how was your day? And you say, well, it was all quite. I went to go and present at a conference and ended up having this conversation.
Love your brother's work. Just love what he's done.
I would say, go back to values, which is if you're starting a company, there's a real focus on saying, the idea, the business plan, raise money, all that kind of stuff. Totally, that's all completely valid. But do not leave your kind of values and your focus on people until, as a sort of afterthought, because it will come and bite you. And often what you see, and it often manifests itself in really interesting ways. And sometimes it can happen when, companies really go through hyper growth and they don't have that foundation. That's when stuff goes really wobbly.
This is not your mission. This is not your vision. These are your values. So
Yeah.
they're the things that you believe represent what is
Yeah,
a
what
value?
I guess how it is to behave. Like the best.
A bit like the royal family is supposed to represent values of Britain,
Yeah.
to be, humble or whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. And you see, you have numerous, examples of this, whether it's WeWork or Uber or software, you just hear of all this sort of like crazy stuff. But it's because the business model was the first and foremost. There was no sort of thought around kind of culture. All the culture was sort of was around supporting that sort of drive. And then you get to a certain number and it just goes off the rails because you add more people into something and it just sort of accentuates
I think
it.
that's great.
So it's something that's really, really, we see this all the time. And often when you see sort of horror stories in the news, you can tend to kind of draw it back to that. So that would be the thing, is really, really focus on your people and culture and values, because you will need to at some point.
And get them a little bit longer than be kind. It's like, be kind about X, or like, you've got to think it out a bit more, I think, isn't it? It's like, I was thinking one, I'd almost say, speak up, or like phone people, but you'd have to like come up with you'd have to really work on how to say that, to say, almost, verbal communication is the ultimate communication. You could take a value like that to say, and actually younger people would find that stressful maybe. Okay, that's great advice, and you've been brilliant. Right, time for a business or bullshit before you bugger off.
Do I need to bring this?
Yeah, get your paddle out. Very good point. Okay, this is going to name some stuff. Oh yeah, we get one. And you got to hold it up, and you got to say the word. And you got to say bullshit. Thought leadership.
I think that's business.
Yeah.
I do. I think there's a real value in people. People are desperate. That's why people will be listening to this podcast. They're desperate to learn. They really want to kind of, whether it's a particular situation or a challenge or a topic or a theme, they're there. If it's not purely for entertainment purposes, I'm sure there's part of that with this, that they do want to learn. And so thought leadership is really important. And that's why you have all these thought leaders out there that do so well, because people want to learn, they want to seek answers.
Plus, otherwise you'd reinvent the wheel, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like, you learn from others.
There are thought leaders out there that I can't stand, because I feel there's an element of inauthenticity around it. Again, it goes back to my kind of, I think I can read people. But there are also people that I know are genuinely doing it because they want to educate and inform people. And so that's where I would probably spin it around on an individual basis, but we're not going to get into that.
Nick, can you read your wife?
Yes.
Ooh,
I
you
can-
are the
like,
only man
now,
in the universe.
whether I can read everyone to a level of perfection, but I can get a good sense of when I'm in trouble or not.
Customer relationship management platforms. You got a CRM?
Business, but often used in a bullshit way.
Really hard to keep up to date. I mean, they're almost always nonsense, aren't they? They're just sort of sales machines. My word is my bond. The concept that a man from London or Britain,
Or woman.
man or woman,
Business.
yeah. You follow that?
I'm old school.
I'm gonna do. I don't know. Let's do internal meetings. Where are you on that? How's your internal meetings going? How many you got? How many you do, Nick?
Too many. So I would say that it is business.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite thing at the moment is trying to have all internal meetings on a Monday.
Oh yeah, we've
Set
got
the
very
week.
similar
Set-
lives,
set the
especially the
week.
Jaws thing.
And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is for customers, clients.
I agree.
Proper collaboration.
Yeah, no, I've ended up with a very similar pattern, and actually it's the I find I have to let my energy build up during the week because it gets more and more intense. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I have to build up to it. I can't. That's why people are like, oh, why can't we do the meeting Monday morning? It's like I just haven't got my trousers on yet mentally. You know, I haven't done physically. I haven't done my emails. I haven't got my head around certain things. And the moment, if I'm getting new information or intense work like that, I don't mind internal meetings the same, but a new client who wants decisions, we've got to run it. You know, it's too much new information. I just I need a moment, you know, anyway. Who cares? Who cares about me? That's it. Yeah, you got to go.
Yeah.
16,669.
Solid.
Well, I couldn't do 66666. I mean, someone would be like, "Oh, and if you add up Nick's letters of his names with numbers, it writes the beast." I don't know. Nick, you were absolutely brilliant. I thought you were incredibly eloquent and clear about what companies should do, and that was really useful advice. I'm sorry we didn't get to chat more about you hanging out with Liam Neeson's children, which has got to be a scary thing to fuck up. I have a special set of skills, you know.
And breaststroke is not one of them. So teach my kids how to do it, please.